Greetings, it's your host, Gabe Morales. Today we're going to talk about another serial killer, this time Richard Ramirez, also known as the Night Stalker. He also went by the Valley Intruder, as his first attacks were clustered around homes in the San Gabriel Valley, just east of Los Angeles, and the walk-in killer, as that was his MO, to break into homes and walk right in, usually while people were asleep at night, and then torture and kill them, and often making them swear on Satan. His murders and sex offenses took place in California between April 1984 and August 1985. Richard Ramirez was born on February 29th, yes, a leap year, 1960, in El Paso, Texas, to Julian and Mercedes Ramirez. He was the youngest of their 5 children, and his rough childhood was considered to be a big influence in his future life of crime and mental problems. He was frequently abused by his father, who was a former Ciudad Juarez, Mexico police officer. And early on in his life, he began developing gruesome, sick, and twisted fantasies, often dabbling in Satanism and the occult. His father later moved to be a laborer in the United States, and in addition to being very abusive, was an alcoholic who often took out his fits of anger out towards his wife and children. Richard Ramirez states that he began drinking and smoking marijuana at the age of 10. When he is 12 years old, Richie, as he was known to his family, became greatly influenced by one of his older cousins, Miguel, also known as Mike Ramirez, a decorated Green Beret Vietnam combat veteran who professed to be a serial killer and rapist when he did his tour in Vietnam. Mike often boasted of his brutal war crimes and even shared Polaroid pictures with Richard, showing Vietnamese women who he later dismembered, decapitated, raped, and murdered. Richard would later state when he was incarcerated that he would fantasize about the images and stories that his cousin Mike shared with him, rather than be repulsed, as most people would. His cousin Mike also taught him some military skills and how to operate under cover of darkness. It was also around this time that Richard began to escape his abusive father and began sleeping at a local cemetery, which didn't faze him one bit. Richard was present on May 4th, 1973, when his cousin Mike fatally shot his wife in the face with a handgun during a domestic violence argument. His cousin Mike was found not guilty of his wife's murder by reason of insanity, but he was confined for several years at a Texas state mental hospital. Shortly after the shooting, Ramirez moved in with his older sister Ruth and her husband Roberto, who it turned out was an obsessive peeping Tom and would take Richard along with him as he peeped in on unsuspecting women on rides at night. His cousin Mike was released from the mental hospital in 1977, sometimes joined as a trio. By the time Richard was 14 years old, he began experimenting with LSD, which is a hallucinogenic that I mentioned in the Manson family video, can cause some people bad trips and may become violent without even remembering what they did. It was during this time that Richard began learning more about Satanism and the occult. He also began researching sexual deviancies, such as bondage, mutilation, and rape, as well as studying serial murders. While he was still in school, he took a job at a Holiday Inn and used his master key to rob patrons while they slept. These were skills that he picked up later when he became known as the Night Stalker. His employment abruptly ended when Ramirez attempted to rape one woman, but was caught in the act by the victim's husband. The husband beat Richard Ramirez on sight, but criminal charges were dropped when the couple who lived out of state never returned to Texas to testify against him. Richard Ramirez dropped out of high school in his freshman year. Besides marijuana and LSD, he began consuming cocaine, and Ramirez would often commit burglaries to support his drug habit. In 1982, the same year that I joined the Marine Corps and went to MCRD San Diego, a 22-year-old Richard Ramirez moved from Texas to California. He mainly stayed in the San Francisco Bay Area and the greater Los Angeles area. On April 10, 1984, Ramirez murdered Mei Lung, a 9-year-old Chinese-American girl, in the basement of his apartment building located in the Tenderloin district of San Francisco. Lung was with her 8-year-old brother looking for a lost $1 bill when Ramirez asked her to follow him to his basement apartment to find it. Once they were in the basement, Ramirez beat her, strangled her, and raped her before stabbing her to death with the switchblade, hanging her partial nude body from a pipe by her house. This killing was not linked to Ramirez until 2009, when his DNA was matched to the crime scene. But Ramirez did not only rape and kill young girls, he even did this with elderly women, basically anybody he considered to be weak. On June 28, 1984, 79-year-old Jenny Vincow was found murdered in her apartment complex in Glassell Park, which is a neighborhood of Los Angeles. She had been stabbed repeatedly in the head, neck, and chest while she was asleep in her bed, and her throat was slashed so deeply that she was nearly decapitated. It was later found that a fingerprint that matched Ramirez was found on a mesh screen that he removed to enter through her window. This was Ramirez's second known murder and established his pattern of breaking into homes and committing vicious murders while taunting and torturing his victims while he burglarized their residence before he brutally killed them. On March 17, 1985, Ramirez attacked 22-year-old Maria Hernandez outside her home in Rosemead, California, shooting her in the face with a .22 caliber gun after she pulled into her garage. She survived when the bullet ricocheted off the keys she held in her hand as she raised her arms to protect herself. Hernandez played dead until Ramirez left the scene. Inside the house, her roommate, Dale Yoshi Okazaki, age 34, heard the gunshot and ducked once she saw Ramirez enter into their home. When she raised her head to see where he was at, Ramirez shot her once in the forehead, killing her instantly. Within an hour of the Rosemead home invasion and murder, Ramirez pulled a 30-year-old Veronica Yu out of her car in Monterey Park, located just east of Los Angeles, and shot her twice with the .22 and fled the scene. She was announced dead upon arrival at a local hospital. These two murders and an attempted third in a single day brought about local news headlines, as the attacker was described as being curly-haired with bulging eyes and wide-spaced rotting teeth. Some news outlets called him the walking killer. Some called him the Valley Intruder. On March 27, 1985, Ramirez entered a home that he had burglarized a year earlier, just outside of Whittier, California. And at approximately 2 a.m. in the morning, he killed a sleeping Vincent Charles Zazzara, age 64, with a gunshot to the head from his .22 caliber handgun. Zazzara's wife was awakened by the gunshot, and Ramirez beat her, bound her hands, while demanding to know where the valuables were in the home. While he was ransacking the room, the wife escaped her bonds and retrieved a shotgun from under the bed, which she was unaware that was not loaded. She aimed at him and pulled the trigger, but nothing happened. An angry Ramirez then shot her 3 times with the .22, killing her. Then he fetched a large carving knife from the kitchen and mutilated her body by carving an upside-down cross into her chest and then removing her eyes with the knife, which he placed in a jewelry box that he'd taken from the home. After he killed her, he attempted to have sex with the body, but was unable to do so. He kept that jewelry box with the eyes in it as a souvenir until he was arrested. The husband and wife's body were discovered by their son. It was also discovered that Ramirez had left footprints from his sneakers in the flower bed, and police photographed the crime scene and made a cast mold of the footprints. Other than the description of the lady who survived the previous murder and was able to give a partial description, this was the only physical evidence that police had at that time. Ballistics were performed also and found that the bullets matched the previous crime scene attacks. So police determined that a serial killer was connected to all of them. On May 14, 1985, Richard Ramirez returned to Monterey Park and entered the home of Bill Doy, age 66, and his disabled wife, Lillian, age 56. Surprising Doy in his bedroom, Ramirez shot him in the face with his .22, just as Doy was going for his own handgun. After beating the badly wounded man into unconsciousness, Ramirez entered Lillian's bedroom, bound her, and raped her, then ransacked the home for valuables. Later on, an ambulance was called, and Bill Doy died of his injuries in the hospital. A couple weeks later, on May 29, 1985, Ramirez drove a stolen car to Monrovia and stopped at the house of Mabel Ma Bell, age 83, and her disabled sister, Florence Nettie Lang, age 81. Finding a hammer in the kitchen, he bludgeoned and bound Lang in her bedroom, then bound and bludgeoned Bell before using an electrical cord to shock and torture the woman. After raping Lang, he used Bell's lipstick to draw a satanic pentagram symbol on her right thigh as well as on one of the bedroom walls. The women were found 2 days later, both comatose, but still alive. Bell later died from her injuries at the hospital. The next day, Ramirez drove the same car to Burbank, California, and snuck into the home of Carol Kyle, age 42. At gunpoint, he bound Kyle and her 11-year-old son with handcuffs. He then directed Carol Kyle to show him where the valuables were in the home, then raped her repeatedly. While he was doing this, he ordered her not to look at him, telling her that if she did, he would cut her eyes out. He then fled the scene after binding Carol Kyle and her son together with handcuffs. On the night of July 2nd, 1985, he drove a stolen car to Arcadia and randomly selected the home of Mary Louise Cannon, age 75. After quietly entering her home, he found her asleep in her bedroom. He then bludgeoned her into unconsciousness with a lamp and stabbed her to death using a 10-inch butcher knife that he had taken from the kitchen. Ramirez continued to stab her even after she was already dead, mutilating her body. 3 days later, on July 5th, 1985, Ramirez broke into a home located in Sierra Madre and bludgeoned 16-year-old Whitney Bennett with a tire iron as she slept in her bedroom. After searching in vain for a big enough knife in the kitchen to finish her off, he decided to garrote and strangle the girl with a telephone cord. Richard Ramirez later stated that he saw sparks come from the cord, and when the victim attempted to breathe, he let her go, believing that Jesus Christ had intervened and saved her. Bennett was one of the lucky victims. She survived her attack, although many stitches were required to close all the lacerations on her scalp from the tire iron blows. 2 days later, on July 7th, 1985, Ramirez burglarized the home of Joyce Nelson, age 60, in Monterey Park, one of his favorite stalking areas. Finding her asleep on her living room couch, he beat her to death by stomping her face in repeatedly, even leaving a footprint from his AVS sneakers in her face. After cruising to other neighborhoods, he returned back to Monterey Park and entered the home of Sophie Dickman, age 63. Ramirez then handcuffed her, assaulted and beat her, then attempted to rape her, stealing her jewelry after she swore to him that he had taken everything of any value in the home, and after he made her swear to Satan that this was true. On July 20th, 1985, Ramirez purchased a machete before driving a stolen Toyota to Glendale, California, which is the location where many of the Hillside Strangler murders took place about 8 years earlier. As I said, Ramirez would read up on serial killers, so I'm sure he got ideas from these previous mass murders. He chose the home of Layla Nettie, age 66, and her husband Maxon, age 68. He burst into the sleeping couple's bedroom and hacked them up with the machete, then finished them off with his .22, with gunshots to the head. He then took all the valuables he could find within the home and then fenced those items to buy drugs. After these murders, he drove to Sun Valley, California. At approximately 4:15 in the morning, he broke into the Covenant home and shot one of its residents in the head with a .25 caliber handgun, killing him instantly. He then raped and beat the wife and bound the couple's 8-year-old son before making his mother show him where the valuables were in the home. During this assault, he also made her swear to Satan that she was hiding nothing from him. On August 6, 1985, Ramirez drove to Northridge, located just north of Los Angeles, and broke into the home of Chris and Virginia Peterson. As he crept into the bedroom, Virginia became startled, so he shot her in the face with his .25 caliber handgun. Then he shot Chris in the neck and attempted to flee. Even though he was wounded, Chris fought back, while Ramirez fired off 2 more shots that missed before he was able to escape. Although shook up and traumatized, the couple survived their injuries. On August 8, 1985, Ramirez drove a stolen car to Diamond Bar, and he broke into the home of Sakina Abawath, age 27, and her husband, Elias. Sometime after 2:30 in the morning, he entered the house and went into the master bedroom, where he immediately killed Elias with a shot to the head from his .25 caliber handgun, and then handcuffed and beat Sakina, while forcing her to reveal the location of jewels and valuables inside the home. Then he brutally raped her, as was his MO, and again made her swear on Satan that she was hiding nothing from him, and that she would not scream during his rape and assault. When the couple's 3-year-old son entered into the bedroom to find out what was happening with his parents, Ramirez tied the child up and continued to rape the mom. After Ramirez left the home, Sakina untied herself and her son and sent him to neighbors for help. As you can imagine, by this time, the greater Los Angeles area were in terror of the Night Stalker. with fears that they would be next. Handgun purchases went up tremendously, and people took other precautions. Ramirez, who had been closely following his crimes and actually enjoying them for the most part, left Los Angeles for the San Francisco Bay Area. On August 18, 1985, he entered the home of Peter and Barbara Pan. He shot Peter while he was sleeping in the temple with his .25 caliber handgun, which killed him instantly. He then beat and sexually assaulted Barbara before shooting her in the head and leaving her for dead. And at the crime scene, Ramirez used her lipstick to write a pentagram and the phrase "Jack the Knife" on a bedroom wall. Ramirez again left a shoe print that helped connect him to that crime, as well as the previous ones in Southern California. On August 24, 1985, Ramirez traveled just south of Los Angeles to Mission Viejo. That night, he arrived in the home of James Romero Jr. 13-year-old James Romero III woke his parents, which is when Ramirez fled the scene. But they noticed the color, make, and style of the vehicle, as well were able to remember a partial license plate, and they contacted local police with this information. After this encounter, Richard Ramirez broke into the home of Bill Carnes, age 30, and his fiancée, Inez Erickson, age 29. Ramirez entered through a back door where the couple was asleep. He awakened Bill once he cocked his .25 caliber handgun and shot him 3 times in the head before turning his attention to Inez. He told her that he was the famous Night Stalker and forced her to swear that she loved Satan. He then beat her up with his fists and bound her with neckties from the closet before dragging her to another room and raping her viciously. He then demanded cash and jewels and made her swear one final time to Satan that there was no more. Upon leaving the residence, he told Inez to let authorities know that the Night Stalker was there. Inez was finally able to untie herself and went to a neighbor's house for help, where they called 911. Bill Carnes survived his injuries. Once he was well enough, he was able to give police an accurate description, and police were able to obtain a cast of Ramirez's footprint from the home, although by now this was a different pair of shoes. The stolen Toyota was found abandoned on August 28th in Koreatown, Los Angeles, and police were able to retrieve a single fingerprint from the rearview mirror. This print was positively identified as belonging to Richard Ramirez. On August 29, 1985, police decided to release a mugshot of Ramirez from a 1984 arrest. Now the Night Stalker had a more accurate face than just a drawing. After Ramirez noticed a group of elderly women calling him El Matador, the killer, and after seeing his face on the front page of La Opinion, he fled a store in a panic. I remember the day that Ramirez was caught very well. I was staying at my future wife's home in Corona, watching the television, when the news of his capture came across the screen with live news footage. Evidently, the panicked Ramirez ran across the Santa Ana I-5 freeway and attempted to take an unlocked Ford Mustang, but was pulled out of the vehicle by an angry local resident. Ramirez then ran across the street and tried to take car keys from Angela De La Torre, but the woman's husband, Manuel, witnessed the carjacking attempt and struck Ramirez over the head with a fence post while pursuing him. Like I said, by that time, all of Los Angeles was on the alert for the Night Stalker, and a vigilante group saw Manuel get into it with Ramirez, and they chased him down Hubbard Street in Boyle Heights. He picked the wrong neighborhood to mess around. Police were soon called and responded to the disturbance and found the severely beaten Ramirez, ordered the crowd away from him, and were able to take him into custody. It appeared to me that Ramirez was actually relieved when police arrived to save him from the rowdy crowd. At his first court appearance, Ramirez raised his left hand, which had a pentagram drawn on it, and stated, "Hail Satan."
happy to announce that the individual we have in custody is Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker.
On September 20th, 1989, Ramirez was convicted of all 43 charges, including 13 counts of murder, 5 attempted murders, 11 sexual assaults, and 14 burglaries. During the penalty phase of the trial on November 7th, 1989, Richard Ramirez was sentenced to death in order to be placed at San Quentin's death row. The judge who upheld Ramirez's death sentence remarked that his deeds exhibited cruelty, callousness, and viciousness beyond any human understanding. Ramirez never expressed any remorse for any of his crimes. As I stated in the Hillside Strangler video, for some strange reason, some women find serial killers fascinating and are attracted to them. By the time of his trial, Ramirez had multiple female fans who were writing him letters and paying him regular visits. Beginning in 1985, Doreen Leoy had written him nearly 75 times. And in 1988, Ramirez proposed to her. And on October 3rd, 1996, they were married at San Quentin Prison. For many years before his death, Leroy stated that she would commit suicide if Ramirez was executed. However, she eventually broke all ties with him in 2009 when DNA positively linked him to his first victim, 9-year-old Mei Lung. But a few years later, he had become engaged to an early 20s female writer. Richard Ramirez appealed his case to the California Supreme Court several times and had additional appeals pending upon the time of his death. Richard Ramirez died on June 7, 2013, of complications due to B-cell lymphoma. He also had poor health due to chronic substance abuse and hepatitis C. And while the story of Richard Ramirez is very scary, he is not the only one out there. So again, lock your doors and windows, even on hot summer nights, and take all the necessary security precautions that you can. You should not live in fear in your own home, but you also should not be naive to the fact that there are other lunatics out there still on the loose. For now, this is Gabe Morales signing off for Gangsters, Cops, and Politicians.